because the idea that here you are in a country that is offering you some level of safety. Now you have to convince this other person that you need to be protected. And that is daunting. That in itself is a kind of pressure that no one should have to go through, for the reason that your life is at stake.
Okay. Now, because the reason I'm asking these sort of questions is because I find that these questions are what's missing in a lot of the conversations, the in-depth truth about coming to Canada or immigrating to any country. And
Yes.
there's a person, regardless if it's a judge or a minister or immigration officer, whoever's making the decision about your life and the value of your life.
Yes.
Because the value of your life comes down to that story that you told.
Yes.
And for you to constantly be fighting with someone through years of like you said, a long process is very concerning in a sense, for you to tie this person's life up
Yes.
for years, because number one, you would think immigration, like you said, would be more compassionate and understanding and welcoming, but yet they say we're understanding and welcoming, but yet there's a roadblock because the first thing they say is, we don't believe you.
Yes.
Because we've been to Jamaica, we've had parties in Jamaica, we danced in Jamaica. We don't see violence on TV from Jamaica and the trans community. We don't see violence on TV for this and that. We have friends that live in Jamaica and all these kind of things. Now, and they try to make a rash decision from that. Which I think. And I think sometimes you need people in that whenever anyone goes anywhere for anything, they need to have an understanding and they need to be able to deal with people that can relate to them, understand them, regardless of the situation they're coming from. Now, I wanted to talk to you about the Gully Queens in Jamaica. Did you ever see them there? Do you know any of the girls from there?
No, the first time I came across that that story, that video of what, it broke my heart. It broke my heart because I didn't realize how entrenched the kind of transphobia is in Jamaica, even within from the position of LGBT community, the lateral violence. And just taking a look at that, I had to acknowledge the place of privilege that I navigated Jamaica from, because I've never had a situation where I was living in a gully. Mm-hmm. And that is quite telling of the kind of depravity that when people identify as trans are faced with. Bad enough you might be ostracized from your community, from your family, but to be living literally with sore, that is depraved. And it broke my heart to see that. It broke my heart to see that even though they were forced to go underground, they didn't have a choice. It's their life or living underground. They were still facing oppression from the powers that be. And the pushback is that even underground, they would come and find them to oppress them. So that broke my heart. It broke my heart. Like, where do you go if you're a trans person? If even underground where the sewer is, you can't go. That is quite telling of the social construct.
You know, it's really sad. Even from where I come from, the United States, people think it's all hunky dory there and everything is good. With no health care for the trans community, with no real jobs offering to them because whether the way they look or because they don't understand them, even though they're in the land of equal opportunity and abundance, they people in other countries see America as oh, they have everything, this and that. And this is not necessarily true. A lot of the times the trans community in no matter where it's from are very marginalized. They live below the poverty line and they're doing a hustle every day, whether it's escorting or whether it's trying to do the drag shows or whatever they're trying to do to just make a living and fit in.
Yeah.
And this is why you see a lot of the hurt around the world because other trans women can relate to trans women around the world because they understand what they have to do to have their voice heard, to really fit into society. And I think the government hasn't taken a real look because they see the maybe sometimes trans women don't look the way that they think that they should look or act. And not every woman in the world is acting proper.
Yeah.
And this is the way and then they use the umbrella as you're crazy or your mental illness or you're sick in some way. And sometimes these things aren't true. Sometimes people just need a helping hand without that conversation of who you are and what you are and where you are.
Yeah.
And this is something I find terribly shocking
Yeah.
that we still are fighting the good fight for things. Sometimes our voices are on deaf ears. They're setting up these quick fix programs to try to fix things that are ongoing if they would just sit down and listen
Yeah. Yeah.
and really listen and really understand that sometimes that marginalized people can't speak for themselves and they have to make the proper decisions about people's lives because they're dealing with human beings
Yes.
that are fragile. And if you really listen to someone and you watch them and you can see that the story sometimes is really deeper than what the outer frame says.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now, what do you think is needed? What's missing from our voices? People of color, the LGBTQ two-spirit pronoun community, what's missing?
What's missing from our collective voice or the external voices?
I think as a collective, because we've been shouting, we have the pride parades, we have all these different functions, we have all these different advocacy groups and people doing things. What we keep saying the same thing over and over. So something in our voices aren't being heard.
I I've seen in the context of downtown Toronto, I've seen representation, but I would love to see more because representation, uh, not in a tokenistic way, is meaningful to pushing the needle, the conversation and the needle forward, right? When when people from a policy standpoint, if someone is going to make a policy around equity, diversity, and inclusivity regarding sexual orientation and gender identities, and there are no queer and trans folks at the table, who is informing that policy? How do you inform a policy that is going to affect people that are queer and trans without having their voices heard, without centering their voice? They have the lived experience. Why wouldn't that be a valuable tool around making policies that will affect people who are queer and trans. So those are the kinds of things, the kind of meaningful representation, making sure that we center the voices of the people who are most vulnerable at the onset of policies, so that it is well informed, it is rounded, and it will be meaningful once implemented. So that's the way I see some of that happening in Toronto, but I would love more. I would love more because there's been an expansion from once upon a time it was LGBTQ, and then the T was added, and now we're learning that outside of the T there are these multiple not emerging, they've always been, but emerging identifying of gender identities outside of the binary of cishet, transgender. There is no non-binary, and I say now loosely because they've always been there. It's just that now there's been an evolution of identities, and from that perspective, I feel like internally as a community, we have to be open to embrace expansion so that in the conventional world outside of LGBTQ community, they could follow suit. If we're still questioning people who are identifying as non-binary or gender non-conforming, why wouldn't cishet heteronormative people question? And it is our inability to kind of sit down and say, okay, so life is not a static, it is always evolving. And with that evolution comes people understanding themselves from different perspectives, and we should embrace that. I feel